Shalom, everybody. Rabbi Edelstein here again with a short Torah thought sponsored by MEOR, Washington, D.C. MEORDC.com is our website. Check it out and learn about the programs we offer at GW and elsewhere around our nation's capital. Well, we're very close to the end of the book of Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Torah, and this week's Torah portion is Mattos, and it deals with many interesting topics. It begins with the topic of oaths and vows. Vow is a neder, an oath is a shavua, and the verse says as follows: if a person will make a vow or an oath upon himself to prohibit something which had been permitted, then lo yachel devaro, he shall not desecrate his word. According to everything that goes forth from his mouth shall that person do. So says the Torah. Now, what is it talking about? Basically, the subject of vows and oaths is a vast one. There's much Talmudic material about it. But in short, a person, through his or her own words, can render something permitted forbidden to him or her. In other words, I could say, for instance, I don't know, theoretically, hypothetically, maybe I've had too much of my bourbon, which I like to drink sometime, and I say, okay, I'm going to make a neder, a vow, that I will not drink bourbon for a month or a year or whatever. And then, if I make it an actual neder with certain specifications, as the oral law explains, that bourbon would be forbidden to me with the force of a Torah prohibition. That's the power we have with our speech in this context to make a vow or an oath that would be binding upon us. And one can also do such a vow or an oath for a positive action, like I theoretically could vow to give charity to a certain organization, and so on and so forth. And the Torah says in such a case, one shall not desecrate their word. Incredible power the Torah gives our speech. We can render something forbidden that had been totally permitted, literally change the reality in a Jewish law, halachic sense, of that object or that behavior by making a vow or an oath. Now, even though the Torah allows us to do such a thing and gives us guidelines to do it, the oral tradition, the sages tell us, for most people, most of the time, it's a bad idea. Don't make a vow or an oath, because it's a great sin to desecrate one's word and not fulfill it. And it's better to just resolve to refrain from the negative behavior or to do the positive behavior without making a vow or an oath. That's why, by the way, observant people, you'll often hear them say, beli neder. I'll do that favor for you, beli neder. I'm not making an oath or a vow. It's a very strong, a dangerous thing to make an oath and then not fulfill it. Hey, think of Yom Kippur. It opens with the prayer Kol Nidre, which that means all oaths or vows we individuals in this congregation may have taken in the past year. Please Hashem, nullify them, lest we come into the Day of Atonement not having fulfilled through negligence or forgetfulness vows we might have made. So making a vow is a very serious thing. But let's talk about just the language of the Torah. Don't desecrate your word. That's what the Torah says. It leads us to understand, by using the word desecrate, that our word is holy. A Jewish mouth has the power of holiness. We became a holy people at Mount Sinai, and when God gave us the Torah, even though the power of speech in a human being in general is a very elevated power, God brought it up even higher for the Jewish people. We have the power of holiness with our mouths, and we can render things forbidden to us through a vow or an oath. Don't do it except in very extraordinary circumstances. But in general, we have to see our speech as something special, elevated, and holy, and try very hard to mean what we say and do what we say. Be very, very careful. The Talmud elsewhere says a person's yes should mean yes, and their no should mean no. And now, where does this power of our speech come from? The Nesiv Shalom, a great commentary, says, just like if you were in the temple and you put flour and oil in a pan for a certain offering to bring in the temple to God, that flour and oil becomes sanctified by being placed in the pan. Well, and that's because that pan is consecrated itself to God's service. Our mouths are consecrated to God's service as Jews. In fact, the very word Yehudi comes from the word lahodot, to thank or to give praise. We are a people created to thank God, give praise to God, teach the world through our words and our actions and our way of life about the reality of the Ribbono Shel Olam, the master of the universe. So our mouths are our sacred vessels. Therefore, the words we say have a holiness. They can create spiritual realities. They do. Good or for bad, God forbid. So be careful with your words. Whatever you say, think before you say. something and mean what you say and do what you say. Never desecrate your words. That's the message of this week's Torah portion in the first topic in Parshas Mattos. Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful and a holy Sabbath. And they say on the Sabbath especially, watch your speech. Be aware of its sanctity and don't waste it on too much involvement in mundane speech like you would do the rest of the week. Certainly not with things that are forbidden or otherwise. Shabbat Shalom.